Welcome back to Garden Talk, brought to you by the Penn State Erie County Extension Master Gardeners. I'm your co-host for today, Mike Bailey, along with Ellen DePlacido. Good morning, Ellen.
Good morning, Mike.
Hey, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, we thought we wanted to talk about raising and whether we want to raise our own transplants or buy them and how that um, lines up with direct seeding.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a nice idea. So, how about if I go
Good.
ahead and give it a start here at the beginning?
Okay.
All
All
right.
right.
So, what plants do best with a little bit of a head start outside of the garden? And I don't necessarily mean in the house because some of this stuff you
hmm
can do in a cold frame or something like that. And it's
hmm
those plants that take a little bit longer to mature. Typically your tomatoes and your peppers and your eggplants and things like that. But also, there's some cool weather crops like broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage and Brussels sprouts that kind of benefit from that earlier start in a some kind of a different area before you actually have the right moment in time to put them into the garden. So but other crops do better with if you direct seed them into the garden.
hmm
It seems
hmm
like that some plants just don't do very well. Okay, adjusting from a being grown in the container to being grown into the open garden soil. They don't seem to handle that transplant shock, if you will, very well.
Okay.
And some of these
Yeah.
things are things like peas and beans and corn, cucumber, squash, zucchini, melons, and even some of your lettuce and spinach and radishes, which are kind of cool weather crops. They really do best direct seeding into the garden as opposed to being started in a container. So
Okay.
I kind of keep those things in mind as you're planning on doing some things, starting some seeds indoors or whatever. But what about starting transplants or buying transplants, Ellen?
Well, there's a lot of pros to starting transplants from seeds because there's such a wide variety of seeds. You can buy seeds in stores, you can buy them in catalogs. There's just hundreds of seeds out there. So there's quite a variety there for you. However, there are some cons to starting your transplants from seeds. It does take some equipment and some resources, time. Some of you might have to decide whether or not you have the time to put into this, and also finding an inside location. You can't just start your seeds outside, and like today, when we have such a drop in temperatures, you have to be very careful. Um, Seeds do germinate relatively easy, but the art of growing from seeds is how to take care of those transplants once their seeds have germinated.
Ellen, can I
Um,
can I just
yeah,
interrupt? I just
sure,
thank you
sure.
for saying that. Okay,
Uh-huh.
because it's people, getting seeds to germinate. It's kind of
Yeah,
easy, but
yeah.
walking them through, nursing them through that, the
Mm-hmm.
4 to 6 weeks of creating a good, healthy transplant. That's where, like you said, the art of the whole practice comes in,
Right,
and that does
right,
take a little bit of practice. Okay, to do that
right,
right. So don't be discouraged if you fail the first time. Go ahead,
right.
Ellen. I'm
And
sorry.
and I'm dealing with that right now with my seeds. They look good, but I'm looking at them 2 or 3 times a day. So buying your transplants. Remember, take a good look at your transplants when you go to buy them and make sure that that foliage is dense and there are sturdy stems. And another thing when you buy transplants, make sure you're ready to plant because you don't want to buy those and bring them home and let them sit. Um, the pros to buying transplants is that someone else did the work for you. You didn't have to do all that work that you did when you were trying to
Yeah,
start
you're right.
your own.
I like that.
Yeah, yeah. Some of the cons, though, are you don't have as much variety because, of course, the greenhouses or the stores where you're going to buy these plants have a very limited variety. And you want to look at your plants carefully again. Make sure they are not past the prime as a transplant, that they're not too root bound, because if they are, you have to be able to break up that root to let that plant grow well. If they're in the flowering mode, they've been there too long. You want your plants to be in the vegetative state so that they're growing, not that they're producing flowers. And inspect those plants for any diseases and insects because we've bought some plants that have had a disease or have been infested with something. So you want to inspect those plants very carefully before you buy them.
Yeah, those are great points, Ellen. So thank you. You did that
Okay.
very well. And now
Okay.
taking a look at direct seeding, all right, using seeds, putting them directly into the soil in the garden. Uh, Seeds are relatively inexpensive. Okay, so if you make
Hmm.
some mistakes doing some of this, you can always kind of start over. But you know, if you plan this correctly and you got the temperature of the soil is so very important when you're talking about direct seeding. The cool weather crops, okay, they'll tolerate that temperature even in the soil temperatures down around 40 to 45 degrees. But the warm weather crops really need that temperature that's going to be above 55 and into the 60s if you want them to germinate and develop into healthy plants for yourself. So, you know, don't start too early with putting those seeds in the ground. You also want to make sure that you plant them at the correct depth. Okay, that the soil isn't going to crust. In fact, I usually put some little bit of peat moss into things, where I planted the seeds, so that kind of keeps it nice and friable. You want to keep them moist, but you don't want to get them real wet. Um,
Okay.
so in depending upon your garden design, like we've talked about in the past, some of these things can be planted relatively intensively. The directions on the back of the seed packets are really for traditional gardening. Okay, planting in rows with seeds 3 to 4 inches apart, in rows 6, 10, 12, 15, 30 inches apart. So, but with intensity, with the raised beds, you can really kind of move them quite close together. In fact, as an example, carrots, we might only put, an inch or inch and a half apart in the beds, and then we use them and thin them as time goes by. Uh, Keep those newly germinated seeds moist. They need that. And if the weather turns hot and dry, you might want to even think about even some shade, because we've learned that we wanted to plant some beets in the summertime, but you got to provide some shade. They don't like that intense heat. Put some
Hmm.
straw over them. And if your plants come up too close, okay, don't be afraid to thin them out. Gardeners are terrible at taking out small plants. They just can't throw anything away. So I think that's a pretty good summary of this whole process that we've reviewed today. So we really appreciate your listening, and our time is running out. So Ellen, thank you very much. You did a wonderful job.
Hmm.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you now.
Okay. Have a good day.
Bye bye.